All right, so welcome everybody to another episode of the Intrepid Global Citizen podcast. We have a friend here who I met in South Korea a few months ago, who's also the author of this great book here, which I recommend all of you pick up. His name is Tim Millikin, and the book is called Reading to Reading: A Bicycle Journey Around the World. So, welcome, Tim, to the podcast, and
Thank
maybe you
you.
can just introduce yourself briefly to our listeners out there.
Thank you, George. Yeah, nice one. It's nice to be here. Nice to talk to you again after catching up with you in South Korea. And thank you for starting with a plug for the book. It's always nice to start off with that. My name's Tim Millikin. I wrote the book, and the book is called Reading to Reading, instead of it's a funny spelling of my hometown. So it's not reading, it's Reading. And it charts the journey that I took in 2015 of leaving my hometown of Reading in UK to cycle 46,500 kilometers around the world to Reading in Pennsylvania. Now, why Reading in Pennsylvania? People ask me, because I thought it was funny, basically. Just like the way it sounded. So the journey was always called Reading to Reading. So it was my journey from one place called Reading to another.
Yeah, okay. Very interesting. And the thing I liked about this book and like your style of travel too, I think it's very minimalist. I mean, you did this on 6 pounds per day, and like your bike also was 90 pounds, right? You caught. So, I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
that's a very
I mean,
unique part of the
yeah,
trip, I
looking
think.
back on that, George, like it's pretty mad. I'm not quite sure how I managed to keep the cost so low. It must have been like a real tight one, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah. But I was surprised as well. Like it seemed like you had like budget at least for plenty of beers along the way and everything, and but you still managed with the budget, so that was pretty
yeah,
impressive.
it was, yeah. You know, when you plan a route and you're thinking, oh, I can go anywhere I want to, and then you found other countries where the alcohol is the cheapest. So I kind of went that way around the world.
Okay.
Um,
All right,
but
good.
yeah,
All right. So how did you get the idea for this big trip? I mean, you were out there for 3 years, so on the road. I mean, what was your life like before the trip, and how did you get this idea?
um, so I'll start at the beginning, I guess, is always the best place to start. So I was living in Australia at the time. So I'd left my job in England. I wanted to travel, and I'd moved from Reading to Australia on a working holiday visa. Lots of people do this. It's kind of a common rite of passage for young people. I was in my mid-20s at the time, and I was having a great time. I traveled with my friend Nick. We were seeing the country, and I was having an amazing time going from hostel to bar to hostel to bar to bus, go somewhere else, hostel bar, and it was fun. But there was a moment of realization when I was on a bus, looking out the window, thinking, why am I not seeing all the things in between these hostels and these bars? So I was going from the main towns, the kind of backpacker route up the East Coast, and yeah, I kind of got this desire to go see what was in between, and I wrote in my little notebook, my journal, which I had on me, um, cycle around Australia, and I was like, well, that's a great idea, Tim. Maybe I could just buy a little tent and cycle around buying meals. And it came completely organically, with no real interest other than sort of cycle commuting, at that point in my life. And then I crossed it out in my journal and I wrote cycle home from Australia. And I thought, yes, what an adventure that would be. I could cycle from Australia all the way home. And I had no real idea of how to do that, or apart from I was really excited, and I told my girlfriend at the time, and she said, "You're an idiot." So um, I ditched that idea, and we carried on going around Australia, and we had a lot of fun. We had a car, and we drove, and we worked in different places, and we saw lots of different scenery. Um, and we actually did a small bike trip in Australia as well to kind of test the theory, see if how it would work, and it was liberating. It was so free. We basically bought $100 mountain bikes, and we cable tied a milk crate onto the rack, and we put our backpacks into the milk crate. And it was bogan as anything. The backpack kept swaying and falling out of the milk crate, but just the freedom to be able to then cycle Australia. And we only did like 200 kilometers, and probably took us about 5 days, but it was so fun, and it stayed with me, that trip. And I think with her, to be fair, But when we flew back to Australia, that idea then germinated. So it became, that was the best moment of that year of my life. Maybe we can push that out now to cycle around the world. And that's how the idea germinated at that stage. And yeah, it was kind of fun.
Okay, all right. So that's how it got started then. And what were the first days like on the road? I mean, you're on this big journey to cycle around the world, and then you're leaving from home, right? So I mean, what was that like?
You know what? So I didn't really have any fear. I just had passion. So I said goodbye to my family and friends, and I was really looking forward to this new lifestyle, this new kind of journey, this adventure that I was undertaking. So that was great. What I didn't actually do was do any training at all. Classic cycle tourer on a big trip. It's kind of a common trope, and I don't know why we all fall into it. I'd worn clipless shoes for the first time and fell over 3 times at traffic lights and gave them away to a charity shop. I had no maps. I'd never ridden my bike before fully loaded. It was pretty much a disaster. Like the first day we rode from my house in Reading. So my girlfriend was with me at the time, and we drove from my house in Reading to her uncle's house in North London. And it was like 100 kilometers. And that was probably the furthest I'd ever ridden in my life at that stage, fully loaded, up a hill in Muswell Hill, up the big hill. And we were absolutely knackered at the end of it. Like I was just like, it was tiring as anything. So that first day was a bit of an eye-opener. And that kind of continued over the first 2 or 3 days of just kind of muddling our way through it and learning, after day 2, so day 1, we'd got to Finola's uncle's house in North London, and then we went boozing, obviously, because we were saying a second leaving party with her family. So we're like, all right, well, let's hit the pub. Then the second day, with a bit of a hangover, we did 100 Ks again and stayed in Airbnb. And the Airbnb was like, do you want a bottle of wine? I'm like, great, yes. So we just rode every day of a hangover pretty much. But it was fun. Like, it was the actual core of the adventure. Even though it was really hard and difficult, it was amazing fun and relatively easy, because at that stage it was England. So we spent the whole time looking forward to France, like looking forward to the real adventure. We're always going to start in Europe, because we were, in our home country still. And even though it was a challenge that we knew. But things really turned up a notch when we got to France, because ironically, as we didn't have any maps, we didn't actually know where we were. So we got off the ferry port and had to try and find our hotel that we'd pre-booked, and we couldn't. We had literally no idea where it was. So we just camped in a field in somewhere near, I think it was Calais or maybe Bordeaux, not Bordeaux, the other ferry ports. And so we just slept in the field. So we camped for the first time, set the tent up. We'd never set the tent up either, so we didn't know how to get the fly on. So we just slept under the mesh. It was so easy looking back, but I just think we're in a brain fog. And yeah, obviously at 6 o'clock it started to rain. So like we were getting soaked through our mesh, getting up, and then a farmer come along and shouted us for leave. He's like, get out. So very quickly we packed up and cycled into the town centre and found our hotel and managed to get a proper rest. But it was a really eventful first few days of fun and learning and experience and adventure.
Yeah. And it's always so exciting when you're figuring things out for the first time and getting the hang of things. But I thought you guys got pretty far too without maps. How far did you get without a map on that trip?
Stupidly far. So we didn't use any real maps until Germany, I believe. So we'd probably done a couple of 100 Ks. I thought we could just head southeast. So I had a little compass. I bought this little compass on eBay and I stuck it to the front bag of my bicycle. So we're just pointing southeast. So we're just following that basically, which was a stupid decision looking back. This was 2015. Like I used to tell myself, like there was no phones. There was definitely phones. Like, there was definitely maps I could have bought. And I quite like the adventure, but it was really difficult. Like navigating without maps was superly hard. We didn't really know where we were. We were following kind of road signs to let us know how far we were from villages and settlements. We know we could restock up and stuff like that. That was the issue. It was just, it's really good to be following a bearing, and it does give you a grounding of your daily cycle and where you are in your journey. So to do that was quite difficult. But yeah, we cycled across France, through Belgium and quickly through the Netherlands into Germany, where we met Finola's cousin. And she was like, you can just download maps offline. And we're like, oh, can you really? So that was the stage we decided to download an app. I can't remember what the app was called at the time, but we downloaded an app, and it was a game changer for our journey.
Yeah, I really like that section of the book. That reminds me of my first trip in South Korea here in 2008. I did something similar just to practice the Korean language. It was just learning right, left, straight. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty.
Yeah.
Where is the bathhouse? And without a map though back then,
Yeah.
and just try to get around.
Yeah. I mean, like, we had each other and we kind of knew where we were going. I can't imagine the challenge it would have been in South Korean, George. That's quite impressive.
Yeah. It was an adventure, but yeah, those were the good days, right? Without technology, but
Yes.
you guys figured it out.
We did.
So let's talk about, how about when you arrived in Turkey? I mean, that's a big change, right? Going from Europe. Well, Turkey is part of Europe, a section of it is, right? But oftentimes that's like the big change, entering Asia and Turkey. So how was it in Turkey for you?
You know what? So Turkey was fascinating culturally. It's something that it was a big change. It was the second big change, I would say, on that journey, because we'd already crossed from Germany to Czech Republic, and that was also a big change, going from Western to Eastern Europe in a really small border crossing. But going to Turkey kind of amplified it even more, just because it was a predominantly Muslim culture. So Europe is very easy to go around culturally, but that was a different factor for us, and that was eye-opening in a way that, like, everything was new, exciting. The smells were new. The sort of scenery was new. We pulled into a coffee shop and men were set around in their long trousers and smoking and drinking coffee. And there was a donkey, and it just felt chaotic, but also ordered at the same time. And I really enjoyed that. But before we got to Turkey, something happened. So during most of our journey in Europe, we'd been around going, people would ask us if we need any help, and we always said no. It's a very British culture, right? No, I don't need your help, I'm fine. Even if we do need your help, we kind of always say no first, because you don't want to put that person out. It's not about what you actually need. It's about not offending or not bothering that person who's even trying to help you. So, and it was in kind of like Romania and Bulgaria where people were like, do you want to stay at a house often? Like almost, once or twice a week, we'd say, hey, do you want to come and stay with us? And it got to the point where we were like, okay, well, let's just start saying yes to this stuff. I remember a Romanian woman said, do you want a tomato? And she had loads of tomatoes in her garden. And initially, my Britishness was like, no, I don't even. No, keep your tomatoes, you need them. Which is ridiculous, because she was just offering a tomato. And then, rightly, I thought about it. I was like, no, I do want your tomato. Yeah, thank you very much. And then she was like, great, I want to hear about your journey a little bit. And we kind of shared not only the tomato, but also a little bit of our story and her story. And it became much more richer. So that was kind of an eye-opening realization for us both. And then we crossed into Turkey. Now, Turkey is the home of hospitality, and anyone who's ever cycled in Turkey, I'm sure, will agree. I'm sure you've seen this yourself, George, as well, that you can't move 100 meters down the road without someone asking you for a cup of coffee or a place to stay, or do you just want a pizza, or can I just ask you a question? So it's like, that was actually the real intenseness of that richness of Turkey, rather than the sort of stereotypical like cultural differences. It was actually the hospitality difference, and how people would stop us all the time to say, come and have a cup of tea, come and share your story, come and just, what are you doing here? Like, in a really open and honest way, not aggressive or anything, just really curious. I remember cycling past one guy in Turkey early on, and he just stood up, this old guy, wrinkled face, wearing a shirt, trousers, flat cap. He was sat outside a coffee shop with his friends, and he just stood up as we cycled past and just shouted, chai, 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 which is Turkish for tea. And how can you stop? How can you not stop when a man is shouting that at you? So, you know what? I really, really love Turkey. It's a great country to cycle in. You won't get very far each day, but you will drink a lot of tea. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. And the food is great too, right? From what I remember.
Yeah, it was. Yes. Yeah. I'm a vegetarian now, but I wasn't then, so I could eat all the really tasty kebabs.
Nice. There you go. And the thought, what I thought added an additional layer to this book as well is cycling with your partner. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, you guys were really, had a lot of issues here. It's like, wow, this must be tough. You're
Yeah.
contemplating, where is this relationship going? And then you guys end up breaking up on a trip. So I mean, what's that like? And for those of us the listeners out there thinking about cycling with a partner, I mean, I've only done it solo, never
Mhm.
with a girlfriend. So I mean, what advice could you tell them, and maybe you could
Yeah,
get
I
into the
guess,
story there.
yeah, it's quite a common trope that couples do break up on sort of long journeys or even short journeys by bike. It is a hard life, and you're putting yourself in extreme situations of tiredness and hunger, and you're living a life in each other's pocket, so to speak, all the time. So you need to have that relationship really dialed down before you go. I think that would be the key takeaway. And what we did, and this is only my perspective, so I'm sure Finola would have her own, but I've written the book, and it's expressed how I've expressed it in the book is definitely my feelings on our relationship. But I think she would agree. She's read a copy and she's happy with it, so that's good. So we weren't in a good place in a relationship when we left for this trip, and that was the key component to us not having a good time relatively early on in the trip, because our relationship wasn't perfect. There was a very small crack in it. And when you're on the road, these tiredness, these living in each other's pocket, the hunger, the not washing for days, that kind of lifestyle can make that small crack into an absolute crevice, ones you can't get out of. So it was a really, really hard in times. It was great at times, but I talk about this in the book often. We have our issues and we get over them, and we have them again and we get over them, which I think is quite common. But that did kind of make the journey, that first half of the journey did make it into something else. It was rich in beauty at times and rich in frustration and anger at times. So it's definitely a challenge. And so my biggest tip would be just make sure you're both aligned on what you wanted to do. I was a driver for the trip. It was really my idea and my passion, but Finola really clearly wanted to go as well. Like, she rode all the way from London to Malaysia with me. So it's a long journey of nearly a year. So, she wasn't a passenger in this in any way, but it was very much because of that early crack, we could never really repair on the road, and therefore we fell out in Malaysia. But yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult, and also, like, I remember cycling over the mountains at minus 15 degrees. And interesting, this is a good point I raised in the book, actually. It's like when it got really hard, we became together really solid, like a team, because we knew it was potentially dangerous and potentially we needed to work together and get through this, because at times it was minus 15, probably max minus 15, but we're camping out at minus 15 in our sleeping bags. We had to be really tight as a unit to get through that experience. And it was rich and beautiful and amazing. And that country has stayed in my heart ever since. And then when things got easy, when we got to Southeast Asia, when the beer was flowing and everything was cheap and it was sunny, and those cracks that were there in the relationship before, then that became actually a really big crevice, because then we actually took our frustrations out on each other, because we knew both we were safe. So that's when we had the big talk, and then she left in Kuala Lumpur and I carried on cycling.
Yeah, it seems like when you're in tough times, I mean, because you guys were out, like you mentioned, in Central Asia and Kyrgyzstan, sleeping out in minus 15 and everything. It seems like you just had to focus on helping each other survive in that
Yeah.
environment, right? Rather than focusing on the relationship itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Especially because that was new to us. Like, we're both,
Yeah.
from southern England. Like, we're not mountain people. So, like, we
Sure.
knew that this was pretty spicy. Like, we had to get on,
Yeah.
and we did, because actually we both really enjoyed it, and it was a special place to cycle over.
Yeah, and how was that? I mean, just cycling in the extreme cold. You guys even camped outside and what, minus 15?
Yeah, minus
So
15 was the coldest, I think. Yeah. But yeah, so we to get we left a little bit later than we'd planned. So originally we were going to leave in April. We decided to leave in May because we'd have an extra month savings from work. And what that did was knock our plan out a little bit, because by the time we'd got to Kyrgyzstan, it was beginning of October. So, we were crossing the mountains there, the Pamir range, sort of late October. And that's a little bit late, really. It's just the weather just gets a little bit too cold then. And we went through the extremes. We cycled through Georgia and Uzbekistan in like 40 degrees heat in sort of August, September. And then by the time we got to Kyrgyzstan, it was October, and we had to wait for Chinese visas, and that took a week. So it pushed the timings out a little bit. But I wouldn't change it for the world. Like, the roads in Kyrgyzstan are really, really, really well maintained by the Chinese companies. The scenery, therefore, is stunning. It's kind of a bitter cold. It's fresh. It's kind of alpine. It's like, as long as you're wearing enough layers and you're cycling, it's pretty amazing because the sun's down on you. The scenery is amazing. You cycle up to sort of 3,500, maybe 4,000 meters, which was the highest I'd ever been at that point in my life. The food is weird but lovely. Lots of pasta and lots of odd meat in soup. The people are friendly. The beer is cheap, obviously, so that's grand. Not that you want to really be drinking any when it's -15, but like, the country is just so stunningly beautiful that it was a great challenge, and I'm so kind of glad we did it at that time, because it really made those memories and those experiences harden. You know what I mean? Like, that was a real beauty in the trip at that stage, even though it was slightly colder than we'd have liked, but we got through it pretty well.
Yeah. It seems like it was really slow going too. I mean, you said you woke up in the morning and you had to defrost the chain on your bicycle and everything, with dump boiling water on it. And wow.
Yeah, that was the worst day. I remember that time when we woke up and it was like we just left Bishkek and we'd cycled, I don't know, up 800 meters from the town, and it was snowing, and we camped behind this little shed. And like, in the morning, everything was frozen. Like, the tent poles were frozen, right? So we had to get a glove. I had these cotton gloves that I ridiculously bought. And by the time I scraped all the ice off the tent poles to put the tent away, the gloves were wet and ruined. I can't put wet gloves on back in that temperature. Boiling water on the chain. We had a thermos that we bought, so we had some ability to keep some water not frozen, but all the rest of the water on the bike was frozen. Luckily, our stove worked. Our trusty MSR stove worked everywhere, so we could boil the water. But yeah, it was it's just that realization of like, oh yeah, things freeze at night day one.
Yeah. Wow. Well, yeah. Kudos to you guys for getting through that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you guys go into China, and I liked the story of hospitality in the hospital in China. That was one of my favorite parts of this book. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, this is when people say to me, how was China? This is my overall memory of China. And this came right at the end of China, when I was not particularly loving China, and the bureaucracy and the distances and the not being able to be close to the people. But 3 days before crossing the border into Vietnam. So to set the scene, it was 2015, and we'd really kind of had enough of China, and I really was looking forward to getting to New Year's in Hanoi in Vietnam, or just anywhere in Vietnam, basically. I wanted to have a Vietnamese party for New Year's. That was my plan. And I was like, right, let's do this. So we had a mission, and we were cycling on. We're bang on target to hit there on like the 30th of December, ready to get to somewhere in Vietnam for New Year's, maybe Hanoi. I can't quite remember, because unfortunately we didn't make it. So we camped one night by the side of the road, lifted our bikes over the little barrier, and walked down and camped behind an old abandoned building, as you do. In the morning, I packed everything up nice and neatly, walking the bikes back over the barrier, kind of got Finola's bike in my hands, and stepped down from the barrier, and my ankle rolls on the highway. Drop the bike, she comes rushing over. I know that something's gone wrong. I'm like, this is not good. So she brings my bike over, and we kind of assess to see if I can cycle, and I can't even stand up at this stage. I can't even walk. So we're 5Ks from the nearest town, and we have to make a plan, right? So can she go to town, come back and get help? maybe we can kind of roll the bikes down, but it was a flat road. There was no rolling available. So we decided to hitchhike, right? So, you know, Finola's there with a thumb out. I'm being stubborn. I'm not really into hitchhiking. So I'm kind of pushing my bike down the barrier and hobbling away. And I think the hobbling kind of attracted some attention from the local drivers, because after about 2 or 3 minutes, someone actually pulls over and stops. And luckily it's a couple in the back, a very young Chinese couple and their mum, and the Chinese couple speak English. So they're like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, look, I've rolled my ankle, it really hurts. And they're like, cool, 5Ks is a town, there's a hospital there, we live there, we can drive you. I'm like, cool, brilliant, get in. So what the beautiful thing is, I get in the car with the mum and the daughter, maybe, or maybe the partner of the son. I get in the car, he jumps out and he cycles my bike to the hospital. So yeah, he's never ridden it before. He's rolling all over the place in this big, heavy, fully loaded bike. And we get to the hospital and we get assessed, and they're like, look, here's an X-ray. You've sprained it, you've not broken anything, but it's sprained, you to rest it for 3 days. So they put us up in the hospital, and I don't think they've had any Westerners in the hospital before. And by that, I mean, I don't think they've ever had any Westerners in their town before. So like, we were quite the attention. The owner of the hospital and his wife. So the hospital was owned by a Chinese man, and his wife was a head doctor. So she was looking after us, but they were so kind to us. They put us both up in the hospital. Finola slept there as well for 3 days. They took us on a city tour of their city. Every morning we would go to the restaurant for rice noodle soup. Every evening we'd have food at the hospital, or we'd have food in a restaurant again, driven out in the man's BMW to these delicious restaurants. This is delicious Chinese restaurants. They were so kind to us. It was quite amazing. Rennie and Rico were the couple who picked us up, the young English-speaking couple, and they came by pretty much every day to see how we were doing. And we'd kind of formed a real big bond with all these people in the hospital, the staff, the nurses, the doctor, the head doctor. So that when after 3 days it was time to leave, and so when we left that evening, they wanted to have a party for us in the hospital. So like, everyone came into the hospital. We were the only people there. I'm not sure what was this hospital all about, but like, we had a big party, no drink, just like soft drinks and food and chats, and Rennie and Rico were there to translate and swapping WeChat numbers with everybody. It was such a warm, welcome end to a slightly difficult China, and it was memories that would last a lifetime. They even gave us presents. We left there with presents from the hospital, like a blood bag that was a shampoo. Really, really, really fun experience. And like, we're like, okay, thanks for everything, people. Can we pay the bill? We haven't got insurance. We didn't have insurance at this stage, but whatever, let's pay our hospital bill, thinking this is going to be expensive. Oh, Tim, just pay for the X-ray. I was like, oh, thank you. Yeah, how much? $15. Great, no problem. Yeah, so it was such a warm and lovely experience, and actually made my time in China all the better, that small incident. And it's amazing when you have difficulty, hardship, something goes wrong, you could scream and shout and get really angry, and I might have done that, but what really happened was the beauty of the hospitality of the people changed, and it changed my whole perception of that whole 2 months in that country. So it was a really amazing experience, and one that I really take to heart every time I think about it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like hearing, about these cycling trips with you and other people on the podcast. It's just like whenever you're in trouble, it's just people are always just so great, whenever you need something, and they just come and when you need them the most, and yeah, so that's a great story. One of my favorites in your book about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it? Just when you think, like, often it comes at the time when you need it most as well. It's like the universe, not to get too spiritual, but the universe knows you need something, and it kind of always does deliver, which is quite a beautiful thing, really.
Yeah, sure. And then so you guys get into Vietnam, and I remember one of the first things you said about Vietnam was the food. So tell us about the shocking food experience and what you saw in that restaurant.
Vietnam has the most amazing food in the world. It is the most fragrant, delicious, cheap, tasty food you could ever imagine. You know it, the pho, the banh mi, the I don't know, bumbo nambo, like all these amazing dishes are fantastic. And we're really looking forward to it. So we would cross the border, had some banh mi, delicious. We're carrying on for a couple of days in northern Vietnam, close to the border of China, heading towards Hanoi. And we stopped in this very small restaurant, roadside restaurant. And we're like, cool, let's order some food. So I was like, right, I'm having a pho. I was looking forward to a soup all day. Finola probably ordered the pho as well. I can't remember. But what I do remember was the look of her face when she'd come back from being in the bathroom, because what the chef was preparing back there was dog. So there was a man in an overall literally cutting up a dog on a patio floor behind the restaurant. And next to the toilet was a bowl, big silver chef's bowl with 3 dogs' heads in it. So it was, I laugh because it was kind of funny, but at the time it was kind of like, oh my God, we can't eat this. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And we kept trying to ask the lady, we didn't be rude, is there any dog in this meal, or have we ordered chicken? Which you can't do in Vietnamese. So we're just making sort of sounds. Woof, woof, yes, no. Moo, yes, no. And all the people in the restaurant were laughing at us. And I tell you what, we didn't leave. We were, culturally aware that it's the thing. To see it up that close was quite shocking. We ate the soup. I didn't eat the meat personally, just in case, but it was delicious. Like if it was dog, I see why they eat it. But yeah, it was a very shocking experience, and one I remember for a long time, because the look of whiteness on Finola's face when she came back from the bathroom was quite shocking.
Yeah. That's great. That's a great story. They eat dog here too in South Korea, but Korea is so modern and everything. It's just like a memory from the old times when there wasn't that food to eat, and they were basically catching rats for food at that time. But one of my fun stories is I was running a full marathon for the first time in my life, and my buddy bought me like dog soup because it's supposed to be high in protein and give you energy and stamina for the big race.
Yeah, right.
And so I'm just wondering, how was it? I mean, I know you just had the broth, but did you feel anything from any stamina, any change in energy? That's the kind of myth and legendary tale here in Korea.
I wish I could like you and say that I did, but I don't remember at all. I have no real memory of how I felt. Maybe I felt super strong. I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to hightail it out of that restaurant as quickly as possible.
Okay, all right. Maybe it helped you run faster.
Yeah, how was your dog broth? Was it tasty? Did it give
I got in, I was ready for it. I had myself like kind of mentally prepared, because my friend said, okay, you're gonna do a marathon, this is really gonna help you, I'm gonna buy you something special. And so it's like, all right, let's do it. But yeah, just if you wouldn't have told me what it was, I would have said, okay, it's maybe beef or tastes kind of like beef, or maybe duck meat. So
yeah.
But
and did you run faster?
Oh no, it was really, really heavy. So I had this big, this big bowl of soup, and then the next morning I just feel like I have a big, like 2 kilogram lump in my stomach. So, but it was a fun story anyway. Yeah. So then you guys get into Malaysia and you break up with your girlfriend there, and then I remember you said Malaysia was really special to you because your granddad was stationed there, right, in World War II.
He was.
So, I mean,
true.
how was that?
It was really, really beautiful, really kind of like a magic touch. So I went to visit his old place where he was stationed. So I found out from where he was stationed, and I went and paid it a visit. I think it was called Kluang. I think I mentioned it, but I don't remember. I'm pretty sure it's Kluang, which is in the middle of Malaysia. And I kind of cycled around trying to get the memories, and I was taking lots of photos to show him when I returned. And so I cycled around just trying to get the flavor of the city, but it changed so much from being a Malaysian British Army outpost during the Second World War. One thing that hadn't changed was the toast. They do there's a restaurant at the station called Railway Coffee, and they do a toast with a really special jam, and it's been there since like 1913 or so. So he would have eaten at that restaurant, I'm sure. So that was really good to sort of connect with him in that way, even though he wasn't there with me, but just those memories that he would have had that he shared with me over the years. One story I like that he's told me before was that when they were asking for people from his regiment, from his barracks, who wants to go and be stationed in Malaysia, he was one of the first to put his hand up. And then they're like, okay, does anyone know where Malaysia is? And nobody put their hand up. So he kind of had that adventurous spirit, and I kind of feel like I borrowed that spirit from him.
Nice. Cool. And then so then you go into Australia, right? So in this Kakadu National Park, right?
Kakadu National Park.
Yeah, so 40 degrees Celsius, very, very hot, with just carrying, and even you have had some water issues there. So, I mean, can you tell us what's it like? I mean, cycling in that heat, and what advice would you give to somebody thinking about cycling in the extreme heat?
Yeah, it's a funny place, Northern Australia. The South Australia is very different. It's closer temperate to England, especially in the winter. But Northern Australia has two seasons. So it's the wet season and the dry season. And I was there in the dry season. So it's very hot, doesn't rain, but it's kind of like there's a lot of moisture in the air. There's a lot of humidity. But it's the heat that's kind of saps your energy. It saps your everything you do. And I wasn't really prepared for it. Because it's just very different to the experience I had in Malaysia and in Singapore. So Singapore was very humid, but it wasn't as humid as hot as Australia. And I realized that water was an issue. Like, you need to have as much water as possible. I think I was carrying at one point like 14 liters of water, because you need it for, like, when you're living on a very cheap budget, especially in Australia, which is an expensive country. You need it for everything, to cook your pasta, to cook your porridge in the morning, to make your coffee, to drink, importantly, to wash, because you're really sweaty at the end of the day. So 14 liters a day was a lot. And I found that my bike didn't have the capacity for that. So I had probably capacity for 10 liters, potentially. I think I had some water bottles and these big 4-liter Oatley water sacks. And I had 2 of them on the back. But I'd end up getting 1.5-liter plastic bottles and just stuffing them between anywhere I could find, like on the top of the front panniers, in between the back panniers, just full of water. And again, the best thing, I guess, about Australia is that it is actually quite developed on the main road. So whilst I need a lot of water, I was relatively able to find a lot of water. So you can always stock up in the townships, obviously, but there's a lot of petrol stations down the Stuart Highway. So I went from Darwin down to Adelaide and then across to Sydney, but down that main highway is a main road, so trucks go down there, and there are road stops, cafe stops, petrol stations, essentially, where you can grab their water, and they were quite, no one really ever minded that I was using the water from their petrol station. So I didn't filter either. It's a modern country, so I was able just to cook it and use it. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's something you really have to think about, especially if you are remote. So if anyone is thinking about going to Australia and taking any of those really, really, really sandy tracks, the Unanata track, or some of the sort of the 4-wheel drive tracks that run east to west across the country, it would be a lot harder than the experience I had. But you really have to take care out there, because water is life.
Yeah, for sure. And tell us about cycling Zen. I like that, how you got into cycling Zen in your book.
Yeah, I think this is a case of so Fernando and I split up in Malaysia. So the first real experience, because Kuala Lumpur to Singapore was kind of processing that, and it's busy, it's crowded, there's lots of traffic. So by the time I'd got into Australia, I was cycling basically down a highway for 3,000 kilometers with just my thoughts for company. And what I would find is that the time would just pass very, very quickly. And I was like, all right, I'm just setting off my bike, and all of a sudden 3 hours has gone by. And I was like, oh, this is kind of blissful. And it felt like a meditation. No, I'm not a meditator. I don't I don't really have a spiritual side, but I can only imagine that's what it was like. It was that constant movement, that constant drive forward, the sort of relatively slow changing of scenery, the sort of wind in your face or behind you, just your own thoughts of company. And I found that the whole world would just spin by. And I found that my experience in Australia was actually trying to recreate that feeling as much as possible. And it would come not daily, but occasionally. And it was absolutely blissful and amazing. I just was flying through this beautiful landscape, and I really loved it out in Australia. I like the isolation. I like the fact that all the decisions were my own. I like the fact that it was English speaking again, so I could talk to people. I like the fact that there was camps. Like camping in Australia is amazing, and that kind of added to that cycling zen attitude, because when I would need somewhere to camp, I just roll the bike off the road into the bush and set up this beautiful campsite with the tent and the stove and 1,000,000,000 stars above me. And it was a really, really great experience. And I guess I always try to recreate that cycling zen, but I don't know how. So like it comes sometimes and it goes sometimes, but when it comes, it's a really great experience. I'm sure you've
Nice.
had it as well, George.
Yeah, especially in Oman. Yeah, it's kind of
Mm.
this. It was the same atmosphere. It sounds like very desert on both sides of me, with just a long road and the same scenery, and I had to get back like to the capital with like in one day, and it was about 200 kilometers. So it's like, all right, let's do this. I just stopped to eat, and fuel up on food here and there. But yeah, I really got in the zone and just
Yeah.
found my cycling zen. And and just time went by, and before I knew it, I was like, wow, I just cycled 200 kilometers in a day. And I'm usually pretty like laid back about time when I cycle too. I'm not like in a rush to get anywhere, but so I was like, okay, all right, I guess
Yeah.
anything's possible if you just get in the zone and in
Yeah, the
that
zone.
Zen
Yeah,
state.
exactly that. It
Yeah.
is that Zen state. It's like that free state, whatever people call it. And it is yeah, you just all of a sudden you look down, you just gone, oh, I've just gone 60K. And I'm feel great. Like it is really amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then so after that you get to New Zealand, right? And you work there
Mhm.
for a couple weeks, save up some money, and and then you fly to Patagonia. You go to Buenos Aires down to Patagonia,
Mhm.
and so now you're on the other side of the world. So I mean, what
Mhm.
was that like? I mean, just uh,
Windy.
yeah.
A common trope is that everyone cycles from Carretera del Puerto Montt down to Ushuaia, or wherever you start your journey from, because that's the way the wind go. But I was heading to Reading, Pennsylvania, so I started from the bottom of Ushuaia and going up. And the first thing I noticed was that the winds are real. They are all these stories that you hear about people cycling that way in that region. It's no joke. It's probably 100-kilometer-hour headwinds into your face from morning until night, and it's really hard. It's really, really hard. So, I'd be cycling for what, 8-9 hours a day and only go 40 kilometers. So it's really, really the struggle is real. And the biggest struggle is actually trying to find somewhere to camp out of the wind. So like, because you've got your tent, but if it's blowing left, right all evening, you're not going to get any sleep, and you need to get your energy back for the next day's struggle. So I found that I was kind of finding any kind of shelter to put the tent against, an abandoned building, crawling under a storm drain, like just anywhere I could have a little moment of silence from the wind, because it's really, really difficult. But also South America is beautiful. So like, you're juxtaposing this struggle, this like real toughness. But when you get out of the pampa and closer to sort of the mountains of Puerto Arenas, Punta Arenas, Puerto Natales in Chile, the pampa goes away, and you're close to the Torres del Paine National Park, and it is all the struggle fades away for the beauty that surrounds you. So that's a really great moment.
Wow, nice. And it sounds like there's a community of cyclists too. You mentioned the Casa de Ciclista there.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that community like? And
It's amazing. So not only is there a community of Westerners and non-Westerners, locals, cycle touring. It's a very popular destination, so you meet a lot of people on the road, which is great. I rode with a lot of close friends I would call them now. Yeah, they weren't when I met them, but they are now. And there's also this network of places to stay called the Casa de Ciclista, House of the Cyclist. And it's basically a place you don't have to pre-book. So it's not like a warm showers where you can message someone and say, I'm going to be in your town, so-and-so a date in the future. You can just knock on the door and be like, hola. And they're like, they see the bike, they see you, they invite you in, and you can stay the night. And it could be any weird and random location. So in Tolkien, just 100 kilometers north of Ushuaia, there's a bakery you can stay at. Now, it did burn down recently, but they built it back up and you can stay there again. It's not in the same format that it was. It used to be a big room. Now it's just a few spaces we would have put some beds. But it's a really famous bakery in Tolkien you can stay at. There's campsites in El Chalten, definitely. There's one spot that's in the Carretera Astral. It's the guy's got a whole house. He's made out of wood with 2 floors with a kitchen set up and bike tools. And often he's not even there. You can just go in and sleep in the house. He's got like a bedding on the top rack where you can put your roll mats out and sleep at the top. There's these weird and wonderful Casa de Ciclistas. And not only is there a website that tells you where they all are, but some you meet by word of mouth or on one of the sort of apps like Ireland or something. You see a little note that says Casa de Ciclista. You say feel free to turn up and you meet cool people and you share cool stories and you get out of the wind. So it's a really great experience.
Wow. Did you get any cycling zen in the wind there, despite the wind in Patagonia? Or maybe you're just trying to focus on
I'm just
swearing at yourself, God damn this wind or whatever.
Yeah, no, I didn't get any cycling zen. I think I was too much in the struggle.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's interesting. And then, so you mentioned in the book that Bolivia gives you a real sense of adventure. And I remember you came back to Bolivia right after this big round the world trip. So maybe you could tell us about Bolivia and how it is to cycle there and why it's so special for you.
I don't know if you've been there, George, but I
haven't. No.
No, it is one of my favorite countries in the world to cycle in, and I've been there twice now. So not only have I done this trip, but last winter, November 2022, I went back with my current partner Joe, and we cycled a bit of the route that I hadn't done previously. So on this trip, I really was looking forward to going to Bolivia. There's a famous route called the Lagunas route, and it runs from the border of Chile in San Pedro de Atacama across the mountains up into 4,000 meter altiplano of Bolivia. And then you've got these 10 days of sandy mountain tracks to reach the town of Uyuni, just past the salt flats. And when I was in San Pedro, I was really looking forward to this route, but there was a massive snowstorm. It's so big that they closed the border for a week. So San Pedro is quite a touristy town. And to me, I didn't want to spend a week and spend a good chunk of cash in San Pedro, staying at quite expensive hostels and eating quite expensive food because it's a very isolated town in the desert in the Atacama. So I decided to cross Bolivia a different way via Calama, back to Calama, and then over to Alagüe and enter through the east of the country there. But it was one of these places that just blows you away. The landscape is so big, so vast. You feel so small. The mountains are massive. The vista, you can see for 100 kilometers when you get to the top of a pass and just see this huge golden brown hues all around you. For me, cycling like that is my favorite thing to do. Big vista, isolated, all your belongings with you, food, water, petrol, everything you need to survive in your tent. And it's fantastic. It's a real adventure. And you've got the salt flats, which is probably one of the most amazing experiences for any cyclist, like an 90 kilometer round salt pan, right? You can see 80 kilometers in every direction as you crunch over the salt as you cycle along. And like no one's there. It looks beautiful because it's all white and no one's there. So when you are there, you have to follow the cyclist tradition of taking off all your clothes and cycling naked, which I did for a very short amount of time. But this is one of the common tropes of the salt flats there.
Yeah, nobody's there, so you can do whatever you want, right?
Do whatever you want. Yeah.
Complete freedom. Yeah. That's good.
But I did return to Bolivia, as I said, just this year gone, and I rode the Lagunas route with Joe, and it was just as amazing as I imagined it to be. So I'm so glad that I was able to go back and revisit that small section that I lost and reacquaint my love of Bolivia once again.
Nice, nice. And so how do you handle the altitude? I mean, in Bolivia, it's what, 4,000 meters, and South
Mhm.
America and Ecuador too. I know you were there
Yeah,
cycling and
yeah.
all
I
these
think
places.
I think I'm lucky, man. Like I'm currently in Chile now. I'm doing on a work trip, and like I was just with a guide recently, and he was saying we went up to 4,200 for a hike, and he was saying that like you seem to be able to acclimatize quite well, and I was like, I think I can. So I think I have a lucky disposition to it. I often find I get a bout of diarrhea when I go over 3,000 meters. Bit weird, but after that, I don't really get the out of breathness or difficulty sleeping that some do. So I don't generally seem to suffer with the altitude sickness too much. Touch wood, it continues. So I'm lucky in that respect. I feel that um, that yeah, I think when you're cycling, you are also going up the elevation very slowly. So I think that really helps. Like, just to be able to slowly go up maybe like 800 meters a day. You're not in a car, you're not zooming up the mountain, and you're sleeping up there as well. So the fact that you're sleeping at elevation means that you acclimatize a lot quicker, because you acclimatize only when you really sleep as opposed to when you're awake, because that's when your body makes the extra blood cells that you need. So yeah, I think luckily I didn't really have any real issues with the altitude, apart from my fascination of seeing how high I was. I would often be checking my phone. Oh, 4,800. Oh, 4,900. Like it's like I'm quite geeky in that way about elevation. I really want to cycle over 5,000, which I'm yet to do. But yeah, you just come back from Pakistan, George. Yeah, you must know all about that.
Yeah, yeah. I found, my limit is about 5,000. I was on
Mm,
a trek in India some years ago, like and the highest it went was 5,200.
mhm,
But I remember being at that elevation, and I took some time to acclimate, and I was sleeping in the altitude at nighttime for a few days, like on the way to that elevation. And after coming down, I just remember just being wrecked for like 2 days after that. It just destroyed me. I was just like in bed, like shivering with a fever, and just couldn't do anything for like 2 days. I had to recover. Must have been altitude sickness. And
mm.
then
Yeah, sounds.
and then in Ecuador, I hiked up the Cotopaxi up to 4,900.
Mhm.
Um, and cycled and hiked up there,
Yeah.
and then the next day after coming down, I was just wrecked as well. So for an entire day. So I figured out my limit is right around 5,000. And but
That's good. That's a good
yeah.
limit. I think there's not much more than 5,000 you could really cycle on
Yeah,
average.
yeah. I don't think I'm gonna hike K2 to the or summit Everest anytime, but
Yeah.
maybe with the help of oxygen. But
Mhm.
yeah. But all right, so then you get into Peru, and you said like the cycling in Peru is quite nice because the inclines are much
Mhm.
slighter than Ecuador, yeah, and
Yeah.
other
It's really
places.
funny. Like even though you go really high, so the highest of this trip was 4,950 altitude
Yeah,
geek, right?
yeah.
So but it's only at like 3 or 4% gradient a lot of the time. So you're actually quite comfortable. Like, the site is not taxing. It's these beautiful long climbs. And you stop all the time and just like look over your shoulder and see where you come from. But yeah, as you said, you get to Ecuador and you cross the border and it's all 15%. And you're just like, geez. So even though it's not as high, it's like 2,500 meters in Ecuador. It's it's just really taxing because you're constantly up and down and you're sort of really, really, really working hard in a way that you weren't working in Peru. Which is, something I didn't expect to find. I thought it would be harder the other way around, but it was not to be.
Yeah. And then so in Ecuador, you were sleeping in the jungle. So what's jungle camping like in Ecuador?
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's a real, real amazing experience. You are out in these kind of like jungle environments, it's green, it's lush, there's like it's quite humid. Um, but you have to be careful for ants. So I hate ants. Ants are the biggest bugbear of my trip. They are get me everywhere. They got me in Malaysia but they got me with a plum in Ecuador, where I camped next to the river, somewhere near Baños in the jungle side of the northern Ecuador. And I'd set my tent out, and I saw an ant, and I was like, "Oh, you're an ant there," but just saw the one, so I thought it's okay. And I was knackered, so I went to sleep really early. I went to sleep about 6, maybe 7, and I woke up at midnight, and there was an ant in my tent, and I was like, "How did you get there?" And I kind of put my headlight on, and I saw 2 or 3 ants in a tent. I was like, "Something's wrong here," and I'd accidentally put my tent square in the path of leafcutter ants. So these little leaf cutters then started nibbling holes in my 300-pound MSR mother hubba, right? Nicking the walls of the tent to make their nest with. I was fuming. I got up and I emptied the tent out and was like, moved, way out the way so that the ants I could get some rest. And then I camped. I was like, it must have been the most expensive the nest they've ever made. But so then in the morning I just covered all the holes up with gaffer tape, and that tent lasted the rest of the way, luckily. But I never was happy to see an ant again.
Okay. And no other ants after that, huh? Yeah. I think
had ant
you were
experiences
in maybe in the States, right? I think you saw ants, and I think it gave you some nightmares about that at one point, right?
Fire ant. I think that was a fire ant.
Yeah.
Was camping just in Texas somewhere, and you're so accustomed in Texas. I think because I spent so long in South America, that when I got to the US, I just threw all my rules away. So I got out of the tent barefoot to go for a wee, and just stepped on this little ant. And it was the most shearing pain I've ever had, like running up from the bottom of my foot right up my leg. And I was in the tent on my own, screaming. This one ant had bitten me. And little buggers they are.
Oh my gosh. Wow. And then, okay, so you get up to the border, Colombia, Panama. So how's that crossing in from South America to Central America on the
Yeah, it's a great
boats?
crossing. Yeah. There's many ways you can do it. But you can fly, obviously, which is probably not actually that expensive anymore because of the cost of flights, but easy, or you can get a sailboat, which is the most expensive way. But again, a bit more adventure, or you can get these free little motorboats, varying in size. The first journey is like 40 minutes. I think the second journey is maybe an hour and a half, and the last journey is 5 hours on these like rickety old motorboats that sort of break down on you as you sail across the Panama the Darien Gaps. You're in the Caribbean, and you're going around the Darien Gap. So my boat unfortunately broke down on me and left us stranded on a desert island for an evening, which was a really fun experience. But there was that moment of like, is the boat ever gonna come back? We've just been stranded here. But luckily they come back the next morning.
That's good. That's good. And then so then in El Salvador, you have the accident there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So maybe you could tell us about what happened and getting over that, especially. I mean, it's probably not easy to get over.
No, so I started the book with this story because I read a book by Leon McCarran, another cycling author, and he starts his book with this amazing story of him almost getting chased across the Kansas fields in the US by these gun-toting attackers. And I thought, oh, this is really exciting. So I started my book with this story as well, which is when I was in El Salvador. I was just crossed the border of El Salvador. I had camped the first night and had all the sort of like new border, new country feeling of excitement and hesitation and what am I going to expect? And El Salvador is dangerous, isn't it? But the whole world hasn't been dangerous, so maybe I'll be fine. Fear that you always have on crossing a border. And then on day 2, there was a town on the map called San Miguel. And I'll go get a San Miguel in San Miguel, if you do. So, it's got a common theme in the book is me drinking beer. So I was like, right, I'll go there. And then I just stopped, was sat, had some lunch, got back on the bike. And the next thing I know, I remember seeing a blue truck behind me, and it basically hit me from behind. And there's some pictures in the book, but I was hit really bad. I have no real memory of being hit. The only thing I remember is waking up on the pavement and looking up and seeing a policeman and just saying hospital. and him agreeing with me and putting me straight in his police car and driving me to the hospital, ironically in San Miguel, where I wanted to go. But I was bashed up real bad. So, you probably can't see it now. This is audio, but I had you could see the skull from the outside of my head. So I wasn't wearing a helmet. I had a helmet. It was clipped to the back of the panniers like an idiot. And I landed on my head and it busted open real bad in that kind of old wrestling speak. And I was in hospital for 10 days. 10 days in hospital to get repaired. The embassy had called my parents to let them know I was in hospital in El Salvador. So that's the parents' worst nightmare. Hello, this is the El Salvadorian embassy calling. It's not what you want to hear if you're a parent. It was bad, but the hospital looked after me really well. Common theme of the journey is hospitality, and they really did take care of me. And the weird Westerner with a hole in his head was well looked after. When I left the hospital, I had a decision to make, and that was, am I going to go home or am I going to carry on? And it was, at the time of the incident and after 2 or 3 days of hospital life, I was going to go home. I'd made peace and I said, I'm going to go home. But as I started to heal, I didn't have any broken bones and I was going to be okay. And that made a difference. Like if I'd broken my leg, I would have gone home without a doubt. There's no way I'd have stayed in El Salvador for 6 months recuperating. But I decided that maybe I was going to be all right, and I hadn't seen my bicycle yet. So, I knew that I was healing. I might have had a completely and utterly broken bike. So I called the embassy and said, look, thank you for your assistance, but I'm going to continue in this country. I'm going to continue my journey. I was 6,000 Ks from Reading, Pennsylvania. So I'd done 40,000 Ks by that point. So I had kind of really wanted to finish as well. Like there was definitely a desire to finish the trip. I was so close to the end. 6,000 Ks a lot, but in percentage wise, I was so close to the end. And since I was able to ride, I did. What lasts longer is the mental scarring, and that mental scarring lasted for years, not just the end of the trip, but longer than that, sort of post-traumatic stress. And I remember, once I got the bike back and repaired, that first time back on the bike was really difficult. I'd pulled up into a T-junction in the town of San Miguel and I wanted to leave. And I had the bike just at the crossroads and I waited for it to be fully clear in both directions before I left from the T-junction. Must have looked like an oddball. It's like there's a car, 500 meters down the road. Oh, no, too scary. But I left and the first day I needed 20K, but that was a really momentous 20K. And I stayed in a hotel. The next day I did 30K. Next day, 40K. Next day, probably 50K. I don't remember. Little by little, I went a little bit more and regained my confidence, regained my mojo. A big moment for me actually was that first night back camping. So I was quite tired and I camped. I'd got hotels the first 3 or 4 nights to recuperate properly. Because I was, once I'd been let out of the hotel, I still needed 10 days in a hostel to recover. So I was probably 3 weeks without cycling. So I was a bit unfit and mentally scarred and physically scarred. And then that first night camp was really what twisted me back onto adventure modes and just being back in the elements and doing my thing that I'd done for the past 2.5 years. So it was not the best experience, but also an amazing experience.
Wow. And how long do you think it took you to get back, mentally? Would you say you're recuperated now? I mean, that's a huge
now.
It
took me years to any loss of potential control. So any accelerating downhills, any kind of speed was, I don't know why, but speed was my thing. Lack of control was what took me a long time to recover. So I remember being in Guatemala and there's lots of, it's a bit like Ecuador. It's really steep and I'd walk down some of the downhills so I didn't feel comfortable. And, shooting forward in my life to post-trip and having, going on a bike ride with my partner and just feeling like I need to put the brakes on a downhill. Now I don't feel that anymore. I don't, it's gone. And I'm confident of that. But there's definitely that feeling of lack of control lasted for years afterwards. Didn't stop me cycling. It just made me more wary when I had potentially less control over the bike.
Okay. Wow. Wow. But that's amazing that you decided to keep going even after that huge
Yeah.
setback,
Yeah, I'm glad I did. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't go home because it allowed me to finish the journey in the spirit that it was intended from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. And for those of you that end up buying the book, which I strongly recommend you do, there's some serious pictures of you
Yes.
like some like busted up basically in the hospital there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like,
It's
wow.
funny as I got wheeled in. I'm so proud I did this. Like as I got wheeled in, I still had the clarity of thought that I should document this, and gave my phone to the doctor wheeling me in. I was like, "Can you take a picture of me?" And my eyes are rolled back, and you can see like the massive scar, the blood in my head,
Oh,
the hole in my head.
it just looks terrible. It looks
It is
terrible.
terrible. Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like it's a good Halloween read for those of you that want to see some scary pictures. Um, So anyway, so you go up Central America, up to the United States through Mexico. So, I mean, what was that like crossing from Mexico to Brownsville, Texas?
Yeah, cathartically exciting. Being in a country where I can speak English again. I remember buying, what did I buy? I can't remember. I went to a 7-Eleven, I think, at the border, and bought myself probably a coffee and a donut, I imagine, and just like asked the lady in English for it and said thank you, and she said thank you back, and I was like, oh wow, I hadn't used that level of English for a long time with random strangers, not with other people that I'd kind of encountered before, other cyclists. But yeah, it was good. It was great to read English. It was great to be in the final country. Um, the US gave me a little bit of a shock because when I went over the border, I didn't get an exit stamp from Mexico because it's quite confusing, that border. Lots of fences, lots of guards. And I went up to the American side and said, excuse me, I didn't get a stamp from Mexico. Can I go back and get one? He just goes, sir, you're on American soil now. And I went, all right, there's my passport, whatever. And yeah, he stamped me in and off I went.
Yeah. Welcome to the land of rules and
Yeah,
rules and
yes,
more rules
exactly.
and regulations.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, no, welcome entry, I must say.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then how was it? You mentioned a lot about guns in Texas. So that must have
Yeah,
been a culture shock for you
yeah, it was,
going in.
and not just, you see guns in the US, no, sorry, you see guns in South America all the time. Like, there's lots of people with shotguns guarding shops and guarding things, but it was the casuality is that word, the casual nature of the gun carrying in Texas was shocking. And I think because it was also English speaking and culturally a lot more similar to my home, that it did seem more abrupt. I remember staying in a guy's house in Texas, a warm showers, a cycling fan, and he allowed me to stay in his house. And it was just a gun on the washing machine. I was like, there's a gun on your washing machine. He's like, yeah, it's no problem. And I was like, should it be on there? Like, and seeing a guy at McDonald's with a pistol on his hip, and I'm like, you're having lunch with your family. Like, why have you? I didn't ask any questions. It was just like, just eye-opening, eye-opening attitude to guns over there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's a culture shock for me too in my own
Mm.
country, just the differences. I'm from the north in Michigan where you don't really see,
Mhm.
the guy, walking into McDonald's with a gun on his hip or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
but
no,
yeah,
yeah.
Texas was a culture shock for me too when I first went there.
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was a cool country, a cool state though. I enjoyed it. The people were friendly. It was just, yeah, that was just an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, and then another good story you have is dumpster diving in Florida. So can you tell us
Yeah,
about that and
that's quite an
what
experience,
your
eh?
thoughts about that were?
By this point, just so I was on a budget and I had my money, and it was running out, and it was running out pretty spectacularly. But I was in Florida, so I only had to go from Florida to Pennsylvania, so I kind of knew I'd be okay. But I was down to what, $100, $200 or something, and um, I had some friends who I met in Peru, Ashley and Leaf, and I'd organised to stay with them. So we stayed with them. First night we went. First day we went canoeing on the river. We bought a load of beers. We went kayaking. It was Gainesville, Florida, for anyone who's interested in those area. Had a great time. It was amazing. Met with their friends. I was like, this is the most livable part of Florida I've ever seen. it was really friendly. Everyone's super friendly and kind of, they call it the state of the weird, I think, or the city of the weird. But yeah, it was really fun. And Leif would then, they'd show me how they live, and they live by dumpster diving. So we went around all the different spots he knew, and we're pulling out so much food, so much wastage from like Trader Joe's and Walmart and things. And we must have got hundreds of dollars of produce at the time. And yeah, there was definitely a community about it, because there was people almost queuing up to get into the bins, which were, open for the people to go and raid. But yeah, it was definitely an eye-opening experience. And also, I can't remember if it was before or after, but people often talk about dumpster diving on a bike trip. Everyone's a little bit on the bogan side, and often we're trying to save money. So people do talk about dumpster diving. And I think I might have tried it before. I can't remember if it was after, but I remember going to a dumpster and peeking in and then getting too embarrassed and being like, no, I can't do this. It's like, but Leif and Ashley had a system, and it worked well for them. Like we must have got a whole, family-sized table full of food out of one dumpster, which was shows the level of waste, I guess, in the US, really, or anywhere, England too, Europe too, but just shows the level of waste that there are in the supermarkets around where we live.
Wow. Yeah, I've never actually done that myself, but I've heard plenty of stories. It's interesting. I didn't realize there was quite a queue to go to
yeah,
get
there was.
get
Yeah,
into
there
that
was a
dumpster.
community. Yeah, there was. And
Wow.
not a queue as such, but like there was, as we left, there were people coming, and it was, it was definitely, people knew where to hit. And I think Leif said to me at the time, like, Trader Joe's is like a good one. Do you know what I mean? That's a nicest bin you can get out of. So they got the best produce. I was like, okay, cool. That's the one to hit, people.
Yeah, you get some organic
Yeah.
like food there. Yeah, in the United States, they have all these rules and everything. So you have you go into a grocery store, and you have a tomato with just a little brown spot or something, and they're like, okay, I'll buy this, I'll take this, and I show it to the worker. By the way, is this on discount? I ask them, and they're like, no, we're selling it at the regular price, because in Korea, if you have like fruit with like brown spots, they sell at a big discount.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah. So you just cut the brown spots off and eat it. It's fine, right?
You go shopping with a pen, right? You're just like,
yeah. And I remember just having reverse culture shock in my own country. They're like, oh, I didn't see that brown spot, sir. We can't sell that to you. We can't sell it to you.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I want to buy this. It's okay. Like, I buy this all the time in Korea where I live. And they're like, no. We're gonna have to throw it out. We can't sell it to you. And I'm saying, so what you're saying to me is that I'm gonna have to go to the dumpster and get this food if I want to eat it. And they're like, I don't know, sir, but we can't sell it to you.
Yes, and you'll find most likely the dumpster's locked. They're not going to allow you in anyway.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. And then, so tell us about your arrival, the big moment arriving to Reading in Pennsylvania.
So it was fun, man. You build this day up, in your head for all the way since from sort of day dot, really, what it's going to be like to get to Reading, Pennsylvania. And when you're miles and miles and miles away, you kind of think, oh yeah, it'd be cool. I'm sure it's a really interesting city. When you get closer and closer and closer, it becomes a realization and a reality. And when you get 200, 400, 1,000 kilometers away, and American people are going like, why are you ending your trip there? And I was like, oh, it's because it's funny. And they're like, that's a really rubbish town. I was like, it doesn't matter. That's where I'm going. No, okay. They're like, New York is 100 kilometers away. I was like, yes, I know that, but I'm finishing in Reading, Pennsylvania. So, it became a reality, and it was really, really fun experience. I really enjoyed rolling into that city, seeing the signs come up for the first time, Reading 100 miles away or whatever it said, and then crossing the state line of Reading, which was a really understated white and blue sign that just said City of Reading on a wall. And I kind of like the understated nature of that. As I arrived, it kind of matched my style of trip. And I arrived, and the night before I got there, I camped out, and it snowed, and it was like, oh, this is the best way to end. This is like eating pasta and pesto out in a random wild camp spot in the US, and it's snowing, and this is so fun. And I was camped on a hill, by a road. There's a road that ran around. We walked up the hill and camped on the top, and there below the hill was like a Dairy Queen and one of those kind of restaurants that are just randomly placed along the side of the road, and it had Wi-Fi that I could connect to. So I was on the hill in my tent connecting to the Wi-Fi, and I get a message from my dad who says, "Oh, where are you going to finish tomorrow?" And I'm like, "Reading, obviously." And he's like, "No, where in Reading?" I'm like, "I don't know." And he's like, "What time are you going to get there?" I'm like, "I don't know." And I'm thinking in my head, obviously, he's going to, why is he asking me these questions unless he's going to be there? But I didn't want to ask him because A, it would spoil the surprise, and he wasn't going to be there. It'd be really sad. So um, I Googled a spot. They had a pagoda, weirdly. So they had this big, in Reading, they have this big pagoda on top of a hill that says "Welcome to Reading" on. I thought that'd be a great place to finish the random the random pagoda. And I said, "I'll be there, maybe 12 o'clock." And I was like, "I don't know exactly what time." My plan was just to get hammered when I get there, but I thought I'll end there and then see what happens. And I climbed this hill, this sort of 200-meter hill. It was a nice climb in the woods on the outskirts of the town. And as I crest the hill and there's a straight, I see the pagoda, and across from the pagoda is a metal structure, and hanging off the structure is a British flag, an English flag, and an American flag. And there's a photographer and a film person. And I'm like, what is going on? And as I cycle towards the flags, I see my mum and dad waving proudly, beaming from ear to ear. So I jump off the bike and give them a hug. And we just say, like, "You did it," was the kind of like this trap line of like finishing the trip. And I was like, "Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did finish it. And I did do it." And it was really emotional. And I'm so happy that they flew out and were there, because it was a really great way to share that trip. It's been a trip of a lot of time on my own, but to share that final moment was really special, and was much better than just getting hammered in a bar telling stories to randomers.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to end it. Your parents are there with you, and you really
Yeah.
to get to see them, and you hadn't seen them in a while either, right? It's
No. I
was
mean,
it was
I
they
did
met
fly
you
back
one time,
once.
right? They
Yeah,
they
that's right.
met.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And they'd got in contact with the local press. So the local paper was there. That's who was doing the filming and the taking the pictures with a professional camera. So that was really nice. And they did an interview, and I made the headline of the local paper, which made me feel good for 5 minutes. And yeah, it was nice. And we went and got food, and then they're like, "Hey, Tim, so we're gonna go home." Obviously, I had my flights booked and things. They had their flights booked, and they were like, "So do you want to cycle to New York?" And I was like, "Nah, I've ended it in Reading, Pennsylvania. Let's get the bus." So we got the bus to New York, and then flew home from there.
Nice. Good. So thinking about this whole trip, I mean, what would you say is the big lessons learned from this trip, or from cycling after this trip? I know you've done a lot of cycling
Yeah,
tours since the book and the big trip. So
I have. Yeah, I mean, like, it's the start of a new way of life for me. Like, so if we look at the biggest takeaways of the trip, there are two main ones I would say. That the world is a beautiful and lovely place, and I really wanted to see if it was. That was one of my missions from the beginning. Is the world a beautiful place? A very simple question. I can categorically say that it is, in terms of scenery and hospitality and friendliness and difference and culture and food and adventure. The world is amazing, and it should be embraced in all its forms. Especially when you get out there and you speak to the people and you mingle and you adventure and you sleep rough and you just see what happens and live by the day. So, like, yes, and also that this chubby guy who had no real cycling experience could just do what he wanted. So if you set your mind to anything, you can do it. I think that's a really important takeaway for me. A personal takeaway was that I managed to cycle a bicycle around the world, and I was 15 stone when I left. There's a before and after photo in the book that shows me being a chunky monkey on day one and relatively lean on the when I got home. So yeah, so the way that I could do it was also a big takeaway of the trip. Like, I just didn't, not that there was many doubters, but just like I had my own personal doubts in my head if I can actually pull this off. And I guess the second part of that was like, yeah, it changed my life. I used to work in television years ago. I've came back from that trip and then started a whole new career in the outdoors, in guiding and cycling and showing people a life and a passion that I'm really keen for. and showing them they can also live this life in different ways. Obviously, if I'm guiding a cycle trip, it can tend to be high end, but I've now allowed my life to blend in with my passion, and that what makes me truly happy.
That's great. I mean, for all the listeners out there, they're probably wondering, okay, like how does one become a cycling guide, and what kind of skills would you need to do that? I mean, obviously you learn how to do it yourself, right? From cycling around the world for 3 years. But for anybody that's listening that's interested in that path,
Yeah.
what would you say to them?
So I gained the core skills, or the interest was gained from cycling around the world. So when I finished that trip, my first job was to teach kids bushcraft. So camping, what else do we do? Camping, sort of survival, shelter building, all this for kids camps. And I kind of expended that section of the trip into showing kids how to do stuff. So I then became confident at teaching, confident about public speaking, and confident about setting the rules and standards and things like that for children. But for a lot of the bike jobs that I applied for, I would given a job based purely on the fact that I would cycle the furthest, essentially, of all the people who applied. So they're like, okay, Tim, you've cycled around the world, but also at interview, I like, some people cycle around the world, you can lose your marbles a little bit at the end. Like, definitely, if you've been on the road for a long, long time, some people can go a little bit strange. I kind of think that I held on to my personality throughout. And so I had interviews, but like what got me into the interview was the fact that I had cycled around the world. So I'd done bushcraft. I then guided bikes and paddleboarding in Qatar for 3 months. And then I got a job as a bike guide, and started on the lowest rung, just the assistant trainee dog's body man across Africa with Tour d'Afrique TDA cycling. And yeah, I guess if you want to get into this role and you want to take your passion into your career, I would say the biggest thing you need to do is apply lots of times. A lot of these companies are really small, and they get a lot of applications. So try and make yours stand out. Luckily, I had my cycle around the world adventure to make it stand out. But if you've got something similar or something about yourself that can make yourself stand out, that's good. And when you get given the opportunity, grab it with both hands. Like when you are the dog's body person, get up early, work hard. These jobs are not easy. They're from 5:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night every day for 28 days, 60 days. So you got to be, they want someone who can muck in, work hard, be nice to people, be nice to the clients, mess around with the crew, be funny, engaging, set the standards that are consistent, and learn quickly. So yeah, it's not easy, but it is does fit my personality type, and it is great that I do get to go around the world and show people what the world is like on a bike. And that's how me and you connected for the first time in real life, George, when I was doing South Korea and Japan, and I was in Seoul at the same time you were. So we went for a lovely dinner, didn't we?
Yeah, that's the great thing about, social media. Like, I remember contacting you because I really liked the cover of your book here. I mean, if you guys are watching this on video, I'll upload this on YouTube too, but I was really impressed by this, so I contacted Tim and asked, "Hey, who did your book cover?" And then so we kind of got in contact that way, and then Tim ended up out here in South Korea on a tour. So, and we had dinner together. So the world is a small place.
It is indeed, yes.
So anyway, I know you have to get going. But
Well, thank you,
anyway,
George. This has been fun. Yeah, it's been good to reflect and talk stories and share. And I hope everyone who's listening to this has enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking to you too. And tell us how we can connect with you and where we can get this book.
Okay, right. So the best place to connect with me is probably Instagram at Cycling Overland. I changed the name because I want to be more cycling based, but yes, at Cycling Overland. And the best place to buy the book now, because I've sold out of physical copies and I'm currently in South America with work, is go to Amazon. So I know they take a bigger cut than I would like, but it gives you the ability to get one to your door straight away. If you would like a particularly signed one, please contact me on Instagram. But just be aware I won't be back in the UK for another 3 or 4 weeks. So I can't really post anything out until then. But I'm really proud of the book, so I hope you enjoy it too.
Yeah. So, all right, good. Thanks for coming out, and go check out Tim's book, Reading to Reading. It's, if you're an American, it's spelled like reading a book. So it's really
Yeah.
easy to remember for those of you out there. And all right, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man.
Okay.